Question, Sugar. Does being gay make someone ungodly? Can one be a member of LGBT and COGIC? And if Jesus were here today, what do you think he would say about it? Sugar, this episode is about to get real as we discuss pride and the pulpit. Hey, Sugar. So, June is Pride Month, and we are kicking things off with a conversation that is poised to challenge the way that we view pride and the pulpit. And by pulpit, we mean church or religious construct. Now, before we go any further, let me tell you what this conversation is not. It is not a debate of human rights. Everyone has the right to be treated as a person, a human being. It's also not a debate on the tenets of nature versus nurture, choice versus born this way. This conversation is meant to challenge our perceptions and the intersections of pride and the pulpit. Okay, Sugar? And let me just tell you, I brought some heavy hitters for this conversation. We have Jason Starr, who is a civil and human rights attorney and member of the LGBTQ plus community, Pastor JC Johnson of the Word Church in Houston, Texas, Dr. Aaron Bishop, who is an author, philanthropist, and pastor, and Dr. Trey Capers, whose extensive research centers around this topic of culture and sexuality. Come on in, guys.
Good afternoon.
Thank y'all so much for just sharing your time and to talk about this important topic with us and with the Sugars. And also big thanks to my fellow alum Jason for letting me professionally borrow the title that turned into the idea for this episode. Okay, so we just gonna jump right into it, right? But I want to start by laying a foundation, just kind of some definitions for us to build on, and as we're having this conversation. So you heard me just say that when we say pulpit, we mean church, whatever your religious denomination. That's what we mean when we say pulpit. Now, when we say pride, Jason, if you don't mind, tell us what does the LGBTQ plus, what is the plus? Like break that down for us, for our listeners who may not know exactly what that is and what each letter stands for.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad to be here with everybody. Thank you so much for this invitation and just the opportunity to converse and share perspectives and hopefully get to a greater degree of shared understanding. So I think, most people have at least heard a community of folks who refer to themselves or identified as LGBTQ plus, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. I may be forgetting a few: queer, questioning, asexual, but I really think it encompasses a set of identities related to one's sexual orientation and gender identity. And for a lot of people, that has meant coming together as people of difference, sometimes even fundamental difference in the way that society or their families have seen them. And when we use the term pride, a lot of people sort of go back to the mid to late 1960s when some gay and lesbian folks across the country first started organizing, creating advocacy organizations, and recognizing that their civil, political, and human rights in this country and elsewhere may be better realized by forming movements and moving together. And so when we talk about pride, I think a lot of people go back to the roots of that history of coming together to advocate and to create community where folks may have been excluded or marginalized or rejected.
All right, coming together. So that's just going to be the jump off point right there, coming together. Because from my vantage point of what I've seen, just from my loved ones, my friends that are part of the LGBTQ plus community, they've received a bit of not coming together, where pride and the pulpit, I mean, it's like if you're part of pride, then you're offending the pulpit, or the pulpit has this vitriolic, response to pride. And so that may not be the case. I'm just speaking from, what I've seen and those experiences that I've heard from clients and again, my loved ones. But I want to put this question out here because I don't want to assume. Is there a divide between pride and the pulpit?
I think it probably would be a resounding yes.
Mhm.
Um, I, being a pastor, I have been very vocal about a lot of different topics, right? I'm the one that usually gets invited to events but never get an invitation to come back. But that's cool. That's cool. I have my good dear sister, Dr. Tierini, who has her own platform that I can come and talk at any time. But I think it is true that there is a divide. When I think about the church, and specifically when I think about the Black church, historically we have been the epicenter of community. You think about the civil rights movement, you think about even going as far back as the plantation. That was the place that Sunday was the day that we were able to be looked at as an individual. We were able to feel free, if it was only for a few minutes or a few hours. We had titles, we had positions. Those leadership qualities that was embedded in us started at the church. The church somehow has become a sanctuary, if I can say that. We have sanctuary cities, or we had sanctuary cities across the country, and you know what that term implies. It's a place where you can come for refuge. It's a place where you can come for restoration. It's a place where you can come and be safe. Yet that sanctuary hasn't always provided that to the LGBTQ plus community. Um, the same place where we come on Sunday to be refueled sometimes has been the place where some community members have come, and instead of being refueled, it almost seemed as if there was a nail put in their tire and the air was deflated out of them, right? Hearing messages that didn't really speak to them unless we're talking about sin,
Mhm.
but yet we utilize them and their talents to be able to advance our ministries. Um, so I will say there's a divide. I think if we ever are to reflect the love of Jesus Christ, this is more than a issue of doctrine. This is more than an issue of belief. This is an issue of humanity. And love covers a multitude of all things. But the church has somehow, some way found a way to uncover the people that need the love the most.
Mm, mm, mm. If anybody wanted, y'all don't have to wait on
Yeah.
me. Y'all go
So
on.
I want to just touch on one or two things. There is a bit of a divide, and I think it's more conversational than it is conceptual. As you all know, we talked about this briefly. I think that's why I'm here on. Parenthetically, thank you, Dr. T, for having this venue for it. I love the conversation, but I actually did the research some years ago and took a good look at the Black church here in the South as it relates to the LGBTQAI plus community. And I learned some things that I kind of already knew. Is that, as Dr. Johnson pointed out, is that the culture of the Black church is designed to be inclusive. As he pointed out, where our community grew its roots from being marginalized societally when we came into the sanctuary, we're all on equal playing field. What my research told me, and in my subsequent studies have shared with me, is that we're not great at addressing conversations that we're uncomfortable with having. And sexuality on any spectrum is uncomfortable. The Black church doesn't do a great job at speaking about heteronormative conversations or relationships. I don't think it's too far of a stretch for them to struggle with same-sex attraction or the concerns of the LGBTQA plus. Dr. Johnson, you pointed out as well, there is a space for that community in the church. They were already serving in it. I think the issue comes where the pulpit is seen to be weaponized against them, and that spectrum isn't, equal against all of what the Bible would consider to be sin. And that's the elephant in the room in this particular conversation. If you look at the scriptures like, Romans 1, the First Corinthians 6, or the Jude 1, those are hard to reconcile. When you go back to the book of Exodus, those scriptures are hard to reconcile even in a present day setting. But if the question is asked, who can be saved? The scripture still says, whoever calls upon the name of the Lord. So you have this abiding, discourse where you have these dichotomous thoughts that all embrace toward embracing people. But what I found is that the church isn't great at having the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Dr. T, I just want to tell you, I appreciate you bringing this to the forefront because this is happening and this conversation happens many a times in silos around cookouts, maybe at family reunions, and maybe even the pews of the church. What's the position the church in this conversation? And I think it has to be courageous because at the end of the day, the courageous thing to say is that to answer your question, it's selective. Someone has already said it. There are many times that the talents of the LGBT community is being used in the church, whether it's forefront of the music choir and the music section or in the administration of the church. And speaking of administration, there's a historical point of reference where the LGBT community and the pulpit worked together. It was during the civil rights movement when Bayard Rustin and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King were a tag team like no other in making sure that they fight against the same enemy. And so today, I think we need to remember that if it's selective, then this is the right time to select that kind of partnership because we do have some situations that are definitely harming society. When I think about my reference to the Panhandle or the D9 organizations that are represented um, on this platform, it's not for us to divide ourselves, but to unite ourselves. Many a days we have seen people denounce their affiliation when we need to pronounce it and say that we're all on one accord. And that's what I can believe that I can learn from the LGBT community. They are ready to pronounce who they are. And at the end of the day, we can't be silent in times like this. When I even consider how unified the community is, I think that even the church is more divided than ever. And so when we look at what may be a common issue, the man that I'm referencing, according to the D9 Association, is a man by the name of Victor Glover. Victor Glover just took a round uh, trip around the moon. And what he came back with is an understanding that we're all in this together. At the end of the day, he found out that whether he was on the light side or the dark side of the moon, when he got back to Earth, we're still here together. And so at the end of the day, what are we in together? We are all in the image of God.
Mhm.
And one thing we got to understand that God is love. And if God is love, what does love look like today?
Mhm. Mhm.
And can I do want to lift up the perspective of Black LGBTQ Christians. As you know, I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not a theologian, but I am a queer man who grew up in South Carolina, for whom the church was a central part of my identity formation. And I just wanted to start by saying, there are about 1.2 to 1.5 million people in the country who identify as Black and LGBTQ, and estimates 80 to 85% of them also identify as religion. Now, that's the largest subgroup amongst LGBTQ people, Black LGBTQ people who identify as religious, 80% or so. So that just communicates to me that there's a lot of people out there um, who find home, who find solace, who find identity formation, just like myself, in the church. And then the research shows that that rejection, that marginalization from a community that's so core, certainly leads to an increase in things like social isolation, which of course leads to increased rates of depression, suicidal ideation, and those other kinds of negative health outcomes. So a lot of times, with my family and with particularly older adults in my life, as we've had these conversations, the question becomes, well, why do I care? Or what's that special concern or solicitude? And I think it starts right there from the real world impacts that this has on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Black people that we call our brothers, our sons, our daughters, our sisters, our spiritual siblings.
So if I may, Jason, I want to speak to that part of it. I appreciate you sharing your insights, but that's part of what the research I did a few years back showed up is that the community, and I mean the church community, the Black church particularly, just doesn't, they don't have the words. They don't know what to say. My findings showed that there is an embrace. It's interesting to see how families can go from the sanctuary at the dinner table and the dynamics remain the same and the variables, don't matter. But it was researchers like Dr. Sandra Barnes at Vanderbilt that did a study of gay Black men that go to churches in the Nashville area. And she said the one thing that stood out among the people that she studied was the reception that the church gave them, that they were welcome there, but no one really knew how to engage with them.
Mhm.
And my takeaways have been and still are for the last several years. Like we got to get better at learning how to talk to one another, which seems odd in the Black community because 15 minutes ago, the majority of us on this on this platform didn't really know each other like that.
Mhm, mhm.
But it's one of the strengths of what makes our community special. But from what I've found from an academic viewpoint, not a social one, please understand that I'm just
Mhm.
researching on that side of it, is that the pastors in the subsets that I took a look at said that the doors are open for everyone. They just don't know what to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dr. Trey, I have to kind of push back on that a little bit because we may not know what to say, but we know what not to say. And so I think some of the issue comes in not necessarily in not having the words, but you got enough words to come at them sideways, and that's been what I've been hearing. It's the harsh words that have been said. It's the vitriolic words
Words.
that have been said. So one thing to not have the words, but then it's another thing to use your words and weaponize your words, from a position of hate.
Well, that's the part B to it. It depends on where you go because affirming churches are a thing. For those that are familiar with, some of the branches of Methodism, there are safe spaces. The Unitarian Church are endorsing churches. Now, if you go to First Church of Christ with Geno Jennings or something like that, yeah, you're going to hear it. But where you go does matter. There are some denominations that do endorse same-sex attraction, the LGBTQ plus community, and you'll see it reflected. Methodism is really advanced in this. So I'll say that it does depend on where you go. Also geographically, the majority of us on the Zoom here are in the South, like in the South.
Mhm,
Not as progressive as you'll see in the Northeastern and the Western parts of the country, where there are just different life viewpoints based on where you live. In other cultures, in other countries, because we did some global studies as well. In Costa Rica and San Joaquin, I spent time at a homeless shelter that was ran in conjunction with the local Catholic Church and the trans community. So some of it is culture, geography, and endorsement.
mhm,
And if I can jump in real quick, because I'm still waiting as we have progressed in all of our technology. I'm still waiting to get my clone. I was one of the first ones in my order, but haven't gotten an update yet. So I'm trying to be in two places at one time, so I may have to leave. But I do want to say this, kind of piggybacking off what my brother, Dr. Bishop, said about being unified. One of the things that I think that is apparent as it relates to the church is that there is a huge divide, because when we even think about Christianity, there are so many different beliefs of what a Christian is. And a lot of people base their level of Christianity off of the sermons that they hear on Sunday and not necessarily the book that they read on Monday.
mm,
So a lot of people's views of religion is based on the doctrine that's taught through the Reformation that they are a part of. So, as you mentioned about the Methodist Church, again, may be progressive in that space. But then when you flip the coin and you look at the Kojic Church, right, where we have seen a lot of the community represented at the convention. They are very colorful in their dress. They're very open in who they are. But then at that same place, it'll be somebody on that pulpit that's preaching down at them, right? I've always said this, is that we don't have to have to wear the same uniform to be unified. And the analogy that I give to that is the NBA. Every team has its own logo, has its own mascot, has its own uniform. They are separate, but they all play under the banner of the NBA. When you think about church, while there are different denominations, we are not playing the same game under the banner of Christianity, because so many of our churches, and I may get attacked by a few theologians that watch this, but many of our churches are not built on the love of Christ. They're built on the letters of Paul. And Jesus had a way of going with the people that other people left. Hence the reason why Judas had to kiss him on the great betrayal, because Jesus, he just grafted in with the boys so much you couldn't even recognize who he was. But when we start to think about the letters of Paul, we start to get a little rigid in how we deliver the Sunday service. And if we could ever get back to the true definition of what Christianity is, being Christ-like, I believe that that divide would be erased. Because if Jesus went to the highways and the byways and he told people to come, how in the world, when the people come, we tell them that they need to leave?
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, I want to upset the apple cart even more now, because I want to build on that by, again, just sort of referring back to my own experience, because I'm the expert of that. But I think a lot of it was also, it's what pastor said was, and not taking a critical eye to. Um, Thinking about like the faith, which to me is all about love, and the ways in which like human beings, including pastors, sometimes maybe we're thinking about the church as an institution, as a political organization, if you will, even if it was local. And in many ways, I always say, like, I don't think, God is love, but like human beings can hate, even if they're standing in the pulpit. And I think someone mentioned, or a couple of people mentioned before this, just tension around like um, seeing the hypocrisy and the selective enforcement, that this sin somehow seems to be more exclusionary, or more damning than all the other things that are kind of out here that we know about, that we seem to excuse. It always felt like, my reality or my identity, this thing that was a part of, not all of who I am, but a piece of who I am, um, uh, colored in a negative way, all the rest of my humanity. And I think that's the way that a lot of, queer people experience, that's a similar experience to a lot of queer people as it relates to their experience with church.
Yeah, and that was the thing that I observed, where we could know that deacon such and such was cheating on his wife, or sister so and so is mean as a rattlesnake, or Redden will come and eat you out of house and home, and not even to get into the murder or pedophilia or anything, but just gluttony, just pride, unforgive. It's almost like we have we have the capacity to extend grace and love and to those sins, but not this, because that's usually the thing that I would always hear. Well, oh, it's a sin. Well, so is gluttony, so is gossiping, So it's, we've all sinned and fell short. So why is it that it seems like this one is high on this made up thermometer of sins that we seem to have? And is that not, you know, calling us out to be hypocrites if that's how we're treating each other? How can we say that we are followers of Jesus if this is how we're treating our sister and brother just because of this particular sin? Am I making sense there?
No, I think you really are making sense. And at the end of the day, hurt people hurt people.
Mm,
You look
mhm.
at the fact that some people are just somewhat disjointed by what they feel is a distortion of God's image. When again, I ask yourself, what does love really look like to you? Because at the end of the day, let me tell you what hate looks like. Hate looks like if you are very vocal about sexuality but silent about injustice. That's hate. That's hate. That's actually sinful in my book. That you can remain quiet for such a time as this, when there are a whole lot of issues outside of people's sexuality that needs to be addressed. So at the end of the day, I think we have to be very honest about why do we have so much hostility to that one subject when there's 99 more issues that should be addressed. And I know I may be saying some things that's already been said, but I think that's a very um, sobering conversation that a lot of pastors need to have with themselves. That why do you get off hands with just one thing when you know there's a whole reservoir of issues that need to be addressed? Because at the end of the day, the church is a hospital.
Mhm.
It is. And so if we are a hospital, look at what the hospital teaches us. If you go in there black, white, green, yellow, or orange, you should get some help. And so, what we should do is open up the door for those who need help and then help them see themselves more like Christ if they're able to find that image in their heart through the power of love.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good.
I
Mm.
think one of the good things that has happened is that now that we have access to more information and people, our geographical distance doesn't mean that we can't connect from and learn from one another. Is that there are resources out there? Because I did, hear the point of sometimes it's like you're welcome. The door is open. The table is set. But like, how do we have this conversation? I mean, I have the language, like the personal experience. I don't want to offend. There also are these, tensions between the doctrine or someone's interpretation of the doctrine and this part of folks' identity. And sort of sometimes thinking, well, I don't have the answers, so maybe we shouldn't approach that tension. And I think it's important to um, sort of recognize that there are resources like out there. There are ways in which people of faith, clergy leaders, leaders in the church who are like, we need to have more engagement, or we want to have more engagement, or we want to be responsive to this, and we want to make sure that our inclusive values show up in the way that we show up. But we need some support. We need some help. And I think what has happened is that LGBTQ folks and organizations that support them and represent them have this hesitance around engaging with faith because they believe it's all exclusionary, because they believe it's all convicting, because they don't believe it's affirming. And there's a risk of us getting further and further and further away from sitting at the table and having these conversations, not because we don't value them, but because we've now stereotyped each other
Yeah.
into a way of being that doesn't seem to be consistent with one another. Faith is really important to these folks. Being an affirmed LGBTQ being affirmed in their identity is important to these folks. And for some reason, it doesn't seem that those two things can actually coexist. When in fact, like I said, for those 1.5 million people who identify as all, they do every day.
Yeah, yeah. And that actually goes to a question that I wanted to ask. Jason, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I really want to highlight how this divide ultimately hurts both the pride community and the pulpit, because you kind of touched on it a little bit again there, Jason, because it can seem like, oh, it's just, the Hatfields and the McCoys, or, but having that divisiveness ultimately hurts both. And so talk to me, anybody jump in about how this divide will ultimately can hurt both communities.
Well, I see it because uh, the nature of the church, the call of the church is to impact lives, right? And when an organization is structured by a doctrine, which is the elephant in the room, they move accordingly, right? I'm not playing an apologist for either side here. I'm a true, a true researcher in this case, while also serving as a pastor. But in this particular sense, I mean, the church by its design is to be transformational in the sense that it addresses, not just the love of the teachings, the life, the ministry of Christ, but also his lordship, right? And it is the desire of the church as an organization, as an entity, as a God ordained thing to change lives, to move people from what the Bible calls sin into, godly living, right? That's the elephant in the room. So when you have a precedent for people that say that the church has made that impact in their lives, I'm talking about the Jackie Hill Parish, I'm talking about the Rosario Butterfields, I'm talking about the Wesley Hills in the Northeast. I mean, literally, that have wrote works on talking about how the gospel kind of pulled them out of what people consider to be a lifestyle. And forgive me for saying what it said to be considered uh, sinful biblically lifestyle. That part is hard to reconcile, even when you want to be affirming, acceptive, and all of those things that build community. So it is an awkward touch point to be in. That does not excuse the weaponization of the pulpit. And I'm not playing apologist again for either viewpoint here. Just kind of sharing from my experience what I've seen and heard from those that I've spoken to in the community. They love the church. And as I said earlier, these are the same groups. It's an awkward dynamic that'll worship together, that'll, have a shouting good time, and then go sit on, their grandmother's back porch Sunday afternoon after dinner, but still live in this awkward contention, especially among Black communities in the South, where we are not just theologically, regardless of how we vote, politically conservative, and also societally. We'll pick our battles, and for whatever reason, the community, the larger community, that of the church, we'll fight racism, we'll fight the socioeconomics, we'll fight all of those major touch points. But when it comes down to those fine points of supporting the LGBTQAI plus community, for whatever reason, and I think it might be deliberate, this is something that the community hasn't decided to fight for.
Yeah.
I think, I mentioned earlier, some of the research around sort of these impacts on Black LGBTQ folks who identify as Christian or religious. But I think for me, again, being the expert of my own experience,
Mhm.
it, that exclusion also hurts the church insofar as, I don't think about the faith as like an ancient um, teaching that isn't alive and relevant and applicable to the realities of today. I'm a constitutional lawyer, right? And so, same thing. I don't believe the Constitution was written and it's just sort of stuck in that time, but that rather it provides broad guidance and can and should be applied um, so that it gets to the outcomes of creating the kind of coherent society that is a democracy. So same thing with the text of the Bible, and that the faith itself can grow and be strengthened insofar as God's love is expressed in different ways as we learn more about the human experience and the human existence. And so, in my experience, those conversations have been illuminating and opening, as someone who grew up in a conservative Baptist church in South Carolina. Not that, Trinity Baptist Church believes anything doctrinally different, but just that it can now become an even more inclusive and dynamic space for these questions to happen amongst sacred siblings together in a way that expands God loves, not restricted.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me say this, and I'm listening to Jason, and I'm learning at the same time so much because it's so important before you try to lecture anybody about their lifestyle. You listen about their lifestyle, and so I appreciate you, Jason, for giving me so much insight because learning of your own skill set is very beneficial to even my personal fight with the benefit for children. Children often have their civil rights stricken away because they are the ones that are voteless, but they're not voiceless. And so, when I look at what you're doing as a fight for civil justice, I appreciate you because at the end of the day, if I can listen before I lecture to learn more about your lifestyle, then maybe compassion and conviction can sit in on me. And maybe if we listen to each other, compassion and conviction can sit in on society. And that's where the bridge gets built because conviction is not about you being damned. It's about us being developed. It's about us learning how to work together in a society where we are all disciples of Christ Jesus in a sense of going ye therefore make it disciples. And what I think disciples are sent to do, because Jesus sent out 12 and 12 fed the 5,000, is for us to deal with those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. At the end of the day, when you look at what you're doing, you're going to fight for righteousness and justice for whoever comes for you for help. And so today, just listening to some of the insight of what you have offered, I want you to know that you helped me a lot. You helped me understand some things already, and hopefully more conversation like this will help more people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. And that's kind of why I asked that question, particularly because from where I sit as a Christian and as a coach, I can see how in some of the clients that I talk to, the mental and emotional anguish, that people in the pride community go through because that's a push pull. What do you mean that this part of me, I was raised in the church, and so that's a very difficult pull on someone's mental, what I'm saying, on their mental health. And then on the church side of things, it's almost become a repellent where we are as the church are supposed to attract people, but if this is how we're treating our brothers and our sisters, regardless of their sexuality, then it then repels others or even allies. The LGBTQ plus allies are like, well, why would I want to be a part of organization or a group or denomination that treats other humans in that way? And so I can see it hurting both sides of the fence, and that's definitely not something that we want to do ever, but particularly going forward in some of the things that we're seeing happening in our world, we do not have the luxury of being divided, and doing back and forth like this. And so that then brings me to this question. Back in the day, we all used to wear these little plastic bracelets that said WWJD. Okay. And so I kind of want to put that here today. WWJD. What would Jesus do if he were walking around, today in 2026, and this is a topic on the table? What do you think Jesus would do? How do you think he would respond?
I mean, I'll start. And the first word that comes to mind for me is just compassion. I think not just with sexual identity or sexual morality within the church and the faith, but so many other things. There seems to be a lot of shame and guilt associated, and I think shame never motivated anyone. And so the first word that comes to mind with me is just compassion, because as I move through the world, as the man that I want to be, my question always as I interact and experience something new, or a new person, is just to know that they um, have a story, that they're a human being, and that I can start and lead with a compassionate understanding. Not necessarily endorsement, not necessarily agreement, but can I start with the compassion of this is just another human being with another set of stories and a history, just like I do. And where can we start from that point?
Yeah, I
That,
think that's
that,
what you just
that's
said.
that's the perfect baseline, bro.
Yeah.
If we could if we
Yeah.
could find some common ground between both, because we all family. That's the thing that that can't be understated here. One of the beauties of the Black community is that whether you know each other or not, like you family, nephew, uncle, sis, the whole nine, right? And to answer your question, Dr. Terry, is that there are some hubs of this where you see it actually being demonstrated, because the affirming church is a thing.
Let me throw this out there. And I know we have at least one attorney on here, and many times he has to be courageous enough to confront truth with power, right? And so, if I really said something outside of compassion, because that was my last answer, it would be confrontation, but with dignity, okay, with respect
Yes.
and with safety.
Yes.
And confrontation doesn't always have to have a negative connotation. It can be very positive because I'm coming to you because I don't want to go behind your back and tell you, talk about you. I want to be able to come to you and say, hey, we do have differences, but can we learn from it?
Mhm.
Right? At the end of the day, man, we should be a learning society of not just, the Bible, because that is a basic instructions before leaving earth, but also about even what we have as far as compassion for each other.
Mhm.
Now, the truth is sometimes people face compassion fatigue because when I come to you and try to tell you how I feel about something, it's not welcome. And then some people are offended because how you said it, right?
Mhm.
And how you approach them. And so
Mhm.
it may not just be just the words you use, but maybe when you use those words.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's so much that I'm not the expert for either one of these two guys because one has done the research and one has lived it. But as a person who has a compassion for human life, you know, I believe that if you give people a chance, you can be a part of the change that people want to see. So that's just my 2 cents.
You can't have any kind of connection or engagement if you don't have a confront. I mean, we having confrontation right here. Like that. This is it. It should be healthy, right? But I think that's part of the problem is that we run away from it because we're afraid of it instead of saying like, hey, we may have to sit with some uncomfortable truths, and that just may be where we land, and that's okay too. A lot of times I tell young attorneys or young organizers. I said, you don't always have to talk to people to convince. Like think about just having a conversation to explain. I explain to you, you explain to me. Now we have the benefit of just one more additional human experience, and you go your way, I go mine, right? But we don't. Every conversation doesn't have to be one where we have to think that the purpose of that conversation is to convince someone to agree with me.
Mm-mm.
See my right? Like a lot of times we just need to um, see the blessing in an interaction with someone, learning from that one experience, and then just adding it to our Rolodex of understanding for ourselves. I did want to make one point too, just one additional point, just around um, uh, for a lot of Black queer people, LGBTQ spaces are also not completely affirming because they are because I'm getting myself in trouble here now, but ain't nothing I haven't said before on record. White LGBTQ people sometimes see themselves as oppressed because they're LGBTQ people, but forget they're white. And forget that we Black
My
LGBTQ
God.
also exist in advocacy spaces and identity development spaces where our Black identity is disregarded, or the dynamics between race are disregarded. So I think sometimes too with the kind of if there's a my family has told me sometimes they can feel like well, you create like a sort of community of people that we feel like we're not a part of. And I said, well, part of that is it's just additive, right? But it's that like I'm not fully myself when I'm in Black spaces because of my queer identity, but I'm not fully myself when I'm in those spaces because of my
Mm.
Black identity. So oftentimes we are like, where are we creating space for to be Black LGBTQ people? And that's why I think a lot of times you have that 80% of that group identify as religious because it has for so many people been a space where they can claim or capture both in some way, right? To start to figure out who I am.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I thank you for sharing that, Jason, because that's just all the more reason why what you said earlier is so important, that we don't necessarily have to agree. It's not for me to try to convince you or anything like that. I don't have to affirm what you're doing, but as you said, Dr. Bishop, with dignity, with respect, with compassion, with love. Like those are things that we should be extending each other regardless. And I guess the thing that I'm just really kind of sticking with is we do that for people who, I don't know, maybe suffer with alcoholism. We do that for people who struggle with, any other type of sin, but we need to make sure that we're extending that to our brothers and sisters that are, part of the pride community as well, because it's and not try to isolate or, because ultimately we're hurting ourselves at the end of the day. We should be the safe space, like you said, like we've been saying, we're brothers and sisters. We should not treating each other any different simply because of what someone chooses to do or not do. That's we shouldn't be doing that, and it's just ultimately hurting both pride community and the pulpit. Mhm,
Uh, but to underscore, not a but, excuse me, to underscore that there are affirming churches do exist. They
mhm.
do. And I kind of want to go back. And Jason, if you could, I'm fascinated by your story, first of all, even to find out that you're from the low country is part of the reason that, I mean, from the South, from South Carolina, is part of the reason I did my research. I can't relate, but I want to know everything. I want to
I'm a kill boy, York County, born and
you're in
raised.
the upstate. I'm from the low country, and then Bishop is from elsewhere and pledged Q and all that other stuff that nobody cares about. You my people. But the churches that would have the same-sex ministry teams, like, what's the perception in the community? Can you bring me into that? Can you speak to it in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think again, religion is an important part of so many LGBTQ people's lives. And so um, for a lot of people, I did a series once called Coming Home to Faith, where it was really focused on like, oh no, you belong here. You have a place here. This was an important part of who you are, culturally, um, uh, your history, sure, all of those things, right? And it's where I learned that I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, like that my purpose was to, end human suffering. So all of these things, and then you feel like you have apostasy from it, like you have to separate from it, and then to be able to come back to it. So whether that is through like an affirming church, so you talked about, the Unitarians, for example. There are a couple of also all kinds of denominations. There are
Right.
affirming
The message.
Baptists,
Yeah.
there's the Methodists, the Episcopalians. I happen to go to an Episcopalian church.
They
Um,
are. Yeah.
in New York, yeah. But you even have affirming Catholic churches and ministries. So I think finding something that allows you to go back and have that as a core part of your community to be able to return to it, I think has helped folks settle into re-engagement with their families, right? Because now they've found that thing that was core and has brought them back and they can talk about, but in a way that doesn't require them to deny a core piece of their humanity. So I think there's a wholeness aspect to it. But again, there are still a lot of people who have been so hurt and traumatized that anytime you sort of talk about engaging with the community of faith, or trying to make churches more inclusive, that for them it's like I got to heal that hurt,
Right.
first. Yeah, to
Yeah,
come.
it is. And some of it's ingrained, in the geography and the makeup of the church. Bishop, I know that, forgive the jokes, by the way. Bishop and I have been friends for a very long time. I've been just chaps, mean brothers. But he pastors a church that, from my understanding, non-denominational primarily. And I serve in a Baptist church. Those are, even though we're all in your Episcopal and, different traditions, same, umbrella concepts as it relates to things matter to the faith. But when you begin to unpack, the levels of organization, of the interpretation of the scripture, the doctrinal matters, the composition of the membership, sometimes those conversations take years before they even get off the ground. So it's
Absolutely.
not a concept that anybody can paint with a broad brush as to how you fix it, because the answer might not ever be tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I hedge back to our community. One of the things that I feel that makes the Black community special above all, and I tell people if God could give me a redo in life, I want him to make me Black in every life.
Every lifetime.
We
Yeah.
understand us, and for the things that fragment us and compartmentalize us, there is still some level of understanding. Dr. T, if you were to be taken back 20 years and I tell you that I'm sitting a chair by the stove on a Saturday night, I get the Vaseline out the bathroom and mama puts a comb on the stove, you can already smell the room because you know what's about to happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, my curls gotta get straight.
Right.
Yeah.
That lay down, and you know not to move before the back of your neck get touch up, but you already
Yeah.
no other culture understands that kind of talk because there are lived experiences that no one else can speak to. And to our brother here, what he has lived, as much as I can research it, I won't know it because I haven't lived it.
But that's why these kind of conversations are also important because
Mhm.
people, folks know about credible messengers. There
Mm,
are conversations that you brothers can have, right? That land differently,
yeah,
that have different impact that I couldn't have, and so to me, like I said, it's this iterative process about becoming safer and safer and safer people for the people around us. And that's why I value these kinds of conversations, particularly amongst men, because
mhm,
I think I do a lot of community work related to Black men's mental health, particularly for our young brothers, and you
Mhm.
know. We're having this conversation layered on top of the fact that we don't often have a lot of
a lot
conversations
of other
writ
conversations.
large amongst ourselves as Black men, and I do think there's particular importance because so much of some of the ways in which I know um, some of the things that are inflected in this conversation include like the patriarchy, for example. So, again, the church is a spiritual home, but it also is a cultural, political, social institution, and being able to kind of think about it and talk about it and have agency and fluency on both sides, I think is really important, particularly for those people who are coming in and saying, like, hey, I recognize this tension. I see it in my family. I see it, whatever. Like, I'm trying to do right by God and what I was taught, but I'm also trying to do right by being a good human. Somebody help me navigate this. And having brothers like you that's like, hey, okay, we
Yeah.
can give you some good guidance and information or just a way of thinking about this that helps you start to balance these two things, I think can be very, very helpful.
Yeah, and Jason, you went right to kind of the last question that I was going to ask, because I always like to give my sugars one tangible takeaway, because what good of information if it's not leading to transformation, right? And so, what's one, and I actually don't want to go large scale. I want to go micro. What's one tangible takeaway? We'll just go around. Everyone, give me one that you would give to someone to say, hey, here's how we can do better. Here's how we can try to move the needle forward, in this to try to close this divide. Of course, it won't happen overnight. Of course, it's not something, we have to eat this elephant one baby bite at a time, So, what's one little thing that you would tell someone that was in kind of in what you just said, Jason, some of the tension, feeling that tension, or that now after having this conversation or after watching this, is like, oh man, I want to, be a positive change to help close that divide. What's one thing that you would say, hey, just here's how we can kind of start moving the needle forward to do better?
When you ask the right questions, you help propel the conversation. And, I learned a long time ago, I don't know everything about anything.
Mm, mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
think my takeaway is that we've been in such a position of rejection that we can't understand reception. Yes, Jesus was the stone that the builder rejected, but we all have been rejected because of sin, and so if we all have sinned, maybe we have to question: Does God receive us? And so, if we find a way to restore what God has really put in the heart of all of us, which is love, then we can be received again. And so, receive each other in love. Understand that the compassion may lead to some conviction, that also requires a level of confrontation. Let's meet and greet and find that safe space to have these kind of conversations. And that's what I think took place today.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna build right on that, which is if you're, part of a church community, you're wondering about this, propose a small group discussion conversation in your church community. You just saw that we just had this little conversation. You don't have to just watch us. You can instigate it and
You can
initiate it.
engage with
We didn't come up with any answers here, right?
them.
A deeper degree of understanding, and I think that's just a good like first step, right? Just if
Yeah.
this isn't a conversation that's been organized, reach out to your clergy leadership. If you are a clergy leadership, just say, hey, we're gonna have this conversation. Create a little bit of a safe space. Maybe reach out to your local LGBTQ org if you have it. If not, check out some of the resources online, and just invite the conversation, as a first step, and then let the children of the Lord take it where it may go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing that I would say is it's kind of that old adage, sugar, if you don't have anything nice to say, or if you don't know what to say, don't say anything that would be harmful to someone else, you know? Sometimes just holding your tongue can go a long way, and at all else, pray for the person because ultimately we don't have a heaven or hell to put anybody in. We have no position to judge anybody. So if whatever is happening is just rubbing you that bad, pray for them. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Sugar, I hope you have enjoyed this raw and real conversation today. And of course, if you have any questions about anything or you want to talk to any one of us, Dr. Trey, Dr. Aaron Bishop, Jason Starr, or even Pastor JT Johnson, you can find their information down below and links to their website and their social media pages below. If you want to invite one of them or one of us to your page or your meeting to have this conversation. I'm speaking on behalf of my brothers. Absolutely. Please just send us a message, Sugar. Okay, Sugar? Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Bye-bye.